Hello students, this video lecture covers basic play information as a reminder and Zeta Elliott's play Quality. As a reminder, some of the key parts of reading a play are the dialogue, which are the written composition between two or more characters. Remember that dialogue can be heard by both the audience and usually the other characters. Next are the stage directions, also often done in italics and in brackets, that indicate movement and acting choices for the directors. It is the writer's opportunity to provide some suggestions of how a character should be performed, how a piece of dialogue should be said and acted. Next, we have the plot. Remember that the plot is the key stuff that happens in the play, right? At our core, one of the things that you need to make sure that you can accurately track in all of our readings is the plot. The plot can be actions, what a character does. They can be the results of those actions, the consequences. It can be the character's desires, and it can be the character's dialogue. All of these are what we would describe as the plot of a play. The plot is the most basic level of reading that you can do for any of the texts that we will read this semester. You should be able to understand what happens in a text without having to discuss it with me or watch a video. In terms of character, we have three character types, but two that are really important. A character is any person in a novel, play, movie, book, or poem. The protagonist is the main figure or the most prominent figure in a story. It is usually the person with whom we spend the most time with as a reader or audience member. But a protagonist does not necessarily have to be the good guy. Next, we have the antagonist. The antagonist is the person who opposes or are hostile to the goals of the protagonist. They are an adversary to the protagonist trying to achieve their goals. Next up, we have a symbol. A symbol is a type of figurative language where a writer doesn't use literal language to explain their ideas. A symbol is a term, a name, or even a picture that may be familiar in daily life, but possesses specific connotations in addition to its conventional and obvious meaning. Symbols are always connected to the theme or ideas of a play. Symbols will often hint at a desire for social change. Symbols present the character's desire to change something about their society. So let's do a plot breakdown for the play Quality. Who are the major characters? The major characters are Colleen, Jane, and Eva, and the minor character is Jeff. Some students are confused when they see the spelling of Jeff, but this is an alternative spelling for the name Jeff. The play is set in a laundry room in a building that is being gentrified. What happens in the play? Colleen makes a choice to follow Eva's interpretation of the new neighborhood and not Jane's. What are the goals of the major characters? Jane, get rid of the old tenants. Eva, form a new version of the building and the neighborhood. Colleen chooses to go with Eva and agree with her on how the neighborhood should be constructed. So let's deal with some important questions surrounding the play Quality. At its core, Quality is a play that deals with the subject of gentrification. Gentrification, as described by Loretta Lees, is the transformation of a working class or vacant area of the central city to a middle class residential and or commercial use. So at its core, gentrification is the changing of a neighborhood, right? Usually it's a transition in terms of wealth from poor to middle class or working class to rich, rich to super rich. Gentrification is often seen to have quite a few issues. The character of Jane represents Zetta Elliott's critique of the ideals of gentrification. As you read Quality, ask yourself, what does Jane's attitude about gentrification reveal about the nature of gentrification itself? Jane provides us with a few justifications for her belief that the neighborhood and the building should gentrify. Jane states on page 12 and 13 that she wants people that share my values and dislikes the natives who she believes will rob people like her. Jane prefers the shareholders to be her neighbors and not the renters. This is an important distinction. The building they are talking about is obviously a co-op building. And so shareholders in a co-op building have a stake in the building. They own a part of the building and more or less own their apartment. The renters are obviously somebody who is simply renting the apartment. They do not own it. So already we see that Jane dislikes people who are different from her. She dislikes people who don't share her values. She dislikes people that she calls natives in the building. And she would prefer to be neighbors with someone who is a shareholder as opposed to a renter. So let's start with a simple question. Is Jane being racist in this play? I think we can understand that Jane is presenting a type of racism that we might call genteel racism. Genteel racism is the belief that we are beyond race, that we have solved the issue of racism. So therefore, no one, especially white people, can be racist. Jane herself presents this genteel racist view. Her statement on page 13, she tells Colleen that she is not racist because she was in Teach for America. But if we go a little deeper, we can see that Jane, throughout the play, is using what we call dog whistles. Dog whistles are coded words that are not racist slurs, but signal a racist meaning. It's a piece of figurative language. Dog whistles are taken from the item, the dog whistle, that if you are unfamiliar with, is a whistle that you can blow. As humans, we cannot hear it, but a dog will go crazy. They can hear it because their hearing is much better. So when we use the phrase dog whistles, we are talking about a type of language that is signifying a racist meaning while attempting not to use any overt racist language. Go through the play and decide what are some major dog whistles that Jane uses, one of which we have already discussed. It's the use of the word native. All right? By calling the older people, predominantly people of color in the building, natives, or calling them dirty, or criticizing their food, Jane is signaling that these are people that are less than her. She is signifying racist meanings without trying to use overt racist language. So, in conclusion, I think the play does present Jane as being a racist. So, if on one hand we have Jane, who presents views on gentrification that present an inherent racism and classism, how does Elliott argue that gentrification could be a positive force? Well, we see the other side of the debate in the character of Eva. Eva represents a different view of gentrification. Eva calls herself a wedge. How might Eva's presentation of herself as a wedge speak to her ability to gentrify the neighborhood in a different way than Jane? Well, Eva describes herself as a wedge because she's from the neighborhood. She grew up there. Her grandmother painted the rose bush outside the building, but she is successful, well educated, and has a good job, which makes her, as she says, the kind of black person white folks don't mind living next to. Uh, this kind of symbol is suggested in Jane's racist dog whistle about Barack Obama, how she wouldn't mind living next to them because they are somehow different from quote unquote normal African Americans. So Eva here is responding directly to Jane's view that the people who are natives, quote unquote, from the neighborhood are dirty, bad, dangerous, and uneducated. So let's focus on this use of the wedge. Eva herself represents a symbol in Elliott's play. Eva tells us that she is a symbol. She says that she is a wedge. Now, a wedge can have a couple of meanings. One, a wedge could split a community. You put a wedge into a log to be able to easier split it. But Elliott is using a different connotation of the wedge here. The centerpiece in this children's game is the wedge. So a wedge can also be something that can bind together and hold down two parts of an arch. So the play suggests that Eva acts as a wedge in the arc, holding the community together. So how do we know? Let's examine the very end of the play. Colleen, who throughout the play has been in the middle of Jane and Eva's discussion on what the neighborhood and the building should be, sides with Eva to have a block party so that all of the members of the building can get to know each other. That way they can have, as the play says, a real mix of people, old and new. But as we know, the old and new does not just refer to renters and shareholders. It refers to black and white, rich and working class. Colleen wants to go with Eva so that together as a community, this building can have a more diverse and balanced representation. Colleen does not choose to side with Jane in her desire to take all of the older working class people who rent in the building and get rid of them. So then, at its core, Elliott's play suggests that gentrification does not need to just be an issue of classist and racist colonization, that there is a potential for people like Eva and Colleen to come together and use gentrification as a force that could balance the needs of poor and rich, of working class and middle class, of black and white. Eva's symbol is a wedge in an arch, holding together the community. So in many ways, this play's theme and discussions of gentrification paint the concept in a positive light, one that could create a new community that is diverse and equitable. What do you think of Elliott's suggestion that there is a potential for a positive form of gentrification?